Hey, welcome into Strictly Speaking here on True Blue. You know, if you listen to the politicians, particularly the current administration that is in power, crime is dropping at a rapid rate in the United States. FBI federal statistics prove it, they say. And yet, why are more and more people being victimized in America's streets? It's kind of a conundrum. I think it's something we need to look into. Dr. Currie Myers is the person to help us look into it. With over 35 years of law enforcement experience, he is America's criminologist. He is also a public policy ethicist, and he's got some ideas on what the real facts are about crime in the United States of America right now. Is it on the rise or is it on the decline? We talk real crime with Dr. Myers next here on Strictly Speaking. Dr. Myers, good to see you again. How are you?
Oh, it's always a pleasure to be on. Thanks so much. Good to see
Yeah,
you.
well, we learn a lot when we talk to you, Dr. Myers, and that is going to be of primary importance today because I think there's a lot of misinformation. That's a popular buzzword these days, depending on what your opinion on certain things is. But I think FBI crime stats, which should be something that we are able to rely on and say that's certainly factual. I think there's a lot of misinformation out there. And according to experts like you, there is. So we want to try to get to the bottom of some of this. So if you've seen the 2023 crime stats that have come out in recent weeks, give me your overall impression of, in fact, I might be able to hit a couple of headlines for you, and you tell me what you think of these headlines and their level of accuracy or not accuracy, if you would. Let's see here. Newsweek: violent crime dropped in 2023 despite Trump saying crime through the roof. NPR: crime in the U.S. fell in 2023, FBI data show. With Washington Post: with crime on the election agenda, FBI gives final 2023 crime stats. FBI finds violent crime declining, and on and on and on it goes through CBS and NBC. Everybody's trying to tell us that what we're seeing with our own eyes is an illusion, that it's some sort of a mirage, because they're saying crime is down, but we're looking at videos and we're looking at news stories that tell us a very, very different story all over the country.
Oh, Bob, crime's so underreported. I think even the criminals are asking is crime up. They don't know either. So it's amazing to me. It's in many ways follow the money, and when you follow the money, you're gonna find out the truth about things. We're getting lied to more and more on statistics, and the crime statistics is just one of those. The FBI, the Federal Bureau of Investigation, the Unified Crime Reporting System, has been the standard for law enforcement to follow. It's always historic, so it always comes in maybe a year or two late. I hope someday we have crime stats that are in real time, but right now they're historic. The problem is, for the last since 2020, the crime stats have actually been spurious. And what I mean by spurious is that the number of agencies putting information into the UCRs has been off. It started out even more in 2020, was up to 45% of the total law enforcement agencies in America were not providing the data. And in 2023, it was down to about 25%. So we're still having about 25% of the law enforcement agencies not providing the data. That is about 6,000 law enforcement agencies out of the 18,000 law enforcement agencies across the country. And when you have that kind of number, that's large sections. So if New York Police Department has provided no data, which in recent years they haven't, there's no crime going on in New York, right? There's no reason to submit any data. Los Angeles, no crime data. Phoenix, no crime data. I just finished a 3-month study on Proposition 47 in California, which is a debacle. It's been a huge debacle. I was embedded with the Riverside County Sheriff's Office this summer. I went out, did the study, put it together. In my findings, I found that 35% of the counties, that all the police agencies in the counties, 35% of those were either underreporting or hadn't reported data to even the California Department of Justice, let alone the FBI. So think of it for a second. The FBI is this giant data collector. The states are usually given the data to give to the FBI, and then the cities and counties give the data to the states. So there's 3 different ways it can get to the FBI, and as a result, a lot of this information is not getting transported up and put into the FBI portals. The main reason, causal reason for this is the FBI changed their software at the end of 2019. They didn't roll it out effectively. And when the government bureaucracy doesn't roll it out effectively, it's not going to be put out. People aren't going to be trained how to use it. They misunderstood software upgrades. It cost a lot of money to do it. And when people put in the data, it kept kicking them out. So what's law enforcement? The person that's sitting there doing the data, they're just going to get up and go, to heck with it. I'm not putting in this information. It's far too much information to be able to put in to be able to understand. And that's the main reason why it's like a giant jigsaw puzzle that you're trying to put together. And as a result, they're citing stats, yes, that the FBI put out, yes, but the FBI numbers are incorrect. And then in my research, Bob, I've done key assumptions that adds to this that we can get into.
I want to do that. And I want to talk about your Prop 47 report as well, because I read it, what you wrote on your Substack, and we'll, of course, steer people to that. There it is. Throw that up there on the screen there, would you, Dylan? The consequences of Proposition 47 on public safety in California. And that's a part of Dr. Myers' Substack, and that's very recent. So we'll get into that specifically. But what I want to know is everything you just said at the beginning about non-reporting from New York City and Los Angeles, and then at the end, as far as the FBI's new rollout of the system in 2019, leading to poor reporting accuracy and so forth coming through. Why the hell are they even releasing statistics at all then if they are that unreliable? And also, why are you the only one that I know that's reporting on it? I know some folks who do this. Peter Kirsanow at the United States Commission on Civil Rights has written a really a good report on this, on crime statistics and the media's manipulation of those stats to show a different narrative than what's really there. John R. Lott with the Crime Prevention Research Center, he's been on this program. He's doing, and certainly, of course, all the mainstream media outlets that I mentioned a few moments ago. I haven't heard anybody saying, by the way, at least not in depth, the FBI rolled out a new system in 2019 that was terribly done, and that 5 years later it's still causing problems. And also the fact that such a majority, such a large number of these cities and departments are not reporting their stats at all. So I mean, every number that these mainstream media outlets is throwing out there, you just kind of have to say, crumple that up and throw it away because it's not real.
Yeah, no, there's quantitative analysis and there's qualitative. And they should be equal, Bob. And a lot of times research focuses way too much on quantitative data, and those are the numbers. But there's colors behind the numbers. You got to understand what the numbers are. So what I do is I actually, I spent 24 years on the job as a law enforcement officer, and I still have connections throughout the country in which I ask people questions. And you got to ask questions. Hey, why aren't you guys putting this data together? The response is they changed the system. I've been out of law enforcement for a number of years now, but you've got to ask questions why something is happening. Until you do that, you understand the fact that that now at some point that it may end up becoming back to it's only 5 or 10%, but right now the data is spurious. What drives me insane is this is all political. It has nothing to do with the truth anymore in numbers. Look at our immigration statistics. When politicians on the left talk about immigration statistics, they're not citing the correct numbers. And there's something that's very important, and that's underreported crime or unreported crime. And that's the major issue. Those are the key assumptions that we're talking about.
There's always been and under reported crime, but it seems to be at a much greater rate right now.
Yeah.
And maybe, and I don't know if it had anything to do with COVID or not, but literally since 2020, from what I'm gathering from a lot of these other reports, the number of crimes that are being reported is lower and lower, and a lot of it is because well, let me rephrase. In addition to the underreported crime, there's a lot of crime that is taking place that police are not responding to because they're not getting 911 calls. People aren't even making those calls. And the Ferguson effect, which you wrote in depth about in your
Mhm.
Prop 47 report, is real, and that officers are hesitant to go and proactively police where they could catch more criminals and thus have more crimes that would be on the books, but they're a little bit afraid of getting involved. And unless they have a radio call and a 911 call and they're dispatched to go to a place, they're not actively looking for crimes because they know that they're going to be accused of profiling if they happen to along the wrong, the wrong crime.
This has been, I call this been a perfect storm of criminality that's occurred. There's different things that have occurred throughout the last, about 9 to 10 years. It started with the Ferguson issues in 2014, and that's where it came up with the Ferguson effect. And as we all know, the Ferguson case in Missouri, which ended up being in riots, Michael Brown, who was ended up killed by a Ferguson police officer. He was an armed robber attacking the police officer. The law enforcement officer was justified in the killing of Michael Brown. He was justified by the local district attorney. He was justified by the investigation by the state of Missouri. He was justified in the investigation by the Department of Justice. There has been no indication that anything he did was wrong. I've looked at it from a crime scene background and events background. I couldn't see anything that was wrong or that matched criminality on his point. But what happened to America? We changed criminal justice public policy because people all of a sudden started assuming that it wasn't correct. And matter of fact, the entire phrase "hands up, don't shoot" started in 2014 as a result of the Ferguson event. So for the
By the way,
Ferguson
Dr.
effect,
Myers, what's really important, you just mentioned all of those different investigations that were done that found that he was justified. The most
yeah,
important of those was the DOJ. The
yeah,
most important of those was the Attorney General Eric Holder, who was essentially dispatched to go to Ferguson and find something because the nation was so outraged at the hands up, don't shoot narrative, which was a lie, but a lot of people did not know that. And in fact, quite frankly, a lot of people still don't know that. But they were, the local and the statewide investigations turned up nothing. So the AG under President Obama at the time was had just a strong motivation to go there and find something in some way to hold this guy accountable for killing a young man, a gentle giant who had his hands up and was saying, please don't shoot, and was just executed in such a way. So when the AG with a mission went to Ferguson to find that whatever everybody else missed to prove that this guy had been killed unlawfully. And when he came around saying, "I got nothing," it was
right.
absolutely a clean shoot. That was incredibly important. That was the biggest event that led to what we now know as the Ferguson effect.
That's correct. And from a criminal justice ethicist point of view, which also is part of my focus, is that should be a problem. You should be um, fair and balanced anytime you're doing an investigation. I spent years conducting investigations as a special agent. There was times mainly homicide, but I also did public corruption and police corruption, and I responded to police shootings in our team. You have to be uh, disparate in how you investigate. You have to look at the cases. You have to understand them. And I try to do that when my research happens. I think there's all biases in all research because we all have different backgrounds that affect how we write and the biases that occur. But to this point, it even showed even more that the person didn't do anything wrong because Eric Holder and the DOJ had a biases to come in and
Yeah.
actually affect policing in an adverse way. Now, I don't think we're seeing the same DOJ that we saw back when Eric Holder was in charge. It was bad enough then. It's totally different now, where we're seeing much more politicalization of the Department of Justice, much more politicalization of the FBI. Apparently now, politicalization of the United States Secret Service. I when I worked on the job, I started in the '80s as a state trooper and worked throughout the early 2000s. And the FBI and the Secret Service was the highest quality of people and organization, and they were wonderful. I was assigned to DEA for 5 years. I worked in that organization, and the ethics were above reproach. There were some issues, but you never saw the politicalization of those groups like you see it today. And the head of the snake is the reason why, and it's affected. From downstream, we still have a lot of good men and women in those ranks that are trying to do the right thing, and they're frustrated because they don't want to see their organization tarnished and not be able to be well respected like they used to be. But the Ferguson effect, in particular, has continued to hurt law enforcement because let me give you an example. If I'm a police officer and it's 1 o'clock in the morning and I pull up to a stoplight and I look over into a school um, parking lot and I see a group of um, older teenage kids massing and talking, and back in the back of your mind, they're up to no good or will be up to no good. It used to be that you would go in and interact with them. They may not be committing any crime, but there's nothing wrong with a police officer going on and saying, "Hey, what's up? How are you guys? What are you guys up to? Where are you going?" And then it's going to set a standard that, hey, law enforcement's watching us. Today, there's a lot of police officers that are not going to turn left and engage with those people. They're going to turn their turning wheel right and just wait until they get a call for response. And that's what's happening. And it's happening especially in progressive cities where the DAs have become politicalized and they're already involved in politics because they're elected. And I'm supportive of that because the more you're elected, you're a representative of the people. I have no problem with that, but they're using their positions as weapons of political power, which we never used to have, whether it was on the left or the right, a long
Well,
time ago.
yeah, no, that's a great example, by the way, and I could give you example after example here in Northeast Ohio, where we're alive today, recording today, I guess I should say. But they just did a study of 2022's traffic stops, and the most important thing to them is breaking it down by race and breaking
Yeah.
it down by sex and trying to find a way to prove that the police are profiling, and that's why cops are just they're not stopping. And guess what? How many times throughout the over the course of the decades and decades does a police officer stopping somebody for suspicious reasons, whether it be a traffic violation, changing lanes abruptly or anything else, that they come to find out they have stopped a crime that was either in progress or it's was about to begin. They have to be able to do that. But now they're terrified to flip their lights on and pull somebody over because something seems suspicious. Because if the race of the individual in the driver's seat isn't right enough times, well, the stats are going to show that we are profiling people. And so they're just afraid to engage because they don't want to get a reputation and they sure don't want to be crossing the wrong person who's going to be confrontational and aggressive with them, forcing a physical altercation that's going to lead to charges of brutality. And I mean that's big picture, but small city example or decent sized city example. You have examples of what the Ferguson effect has done in California vis-a-vis Prop 47. Tell us more about that.
Well, it's the same thing. Is that you're not going to be engaged in a response. You're going to wait till you've been activated or called by dispatch to respond. Here's the other thing it's unusual, but there's a lot of police officers now that have been hired that were hired after Ferguson. So they have no ability to understand what it used to be like to be a police officer and to be proactive. They haven't, and there's less police officers on the street because we've had massive retirements. We had about a 44% increase in retirements. We've had police officers that have separated from the job early, which left and I talked about this years ago, at least 2 years ago, that the separations early and the inability to retain law enforcement is a huge concern of mine because the leadership in the field is a senior police officer and a sergeant, and those senior field police officers can guide and mold new recruits into being good and effective police officers. There is no question about it. In my line of work, I looked up and and they taught me how to look for crime, how to identify crime, how to be proactive in that crime, and be good at what you do, and be fair and be constitutional. Everybody thinks that the whole criminal justice policy system was thrown on its ear when all we really need to do is get rid of the 5% of bad actors that are on the job.
Is
That's
it
the
that
only
high?
thing. Huh? It's
Is
probably not
it
even that high.
yeah, because that seems steep to me, actually. I
Yeah,
mean, if you because it just depends on who you are. Suppose the mainstream media would look at it and see Darren Wilson, the officer in the Ferguson case, as being one
yeah.
of them, and they would
Well,
look
yeah,
at
yeah, yeah, yeah. And
so
so I'm
so
I'm just throwing out a number, Bob, but I'm trying to get, when you look at use, let me give you a stricter number. When you look at use of force complaints and you ask the public how much use of force, and use of force means anything, hands on, whatever, not just shooting.
sure.
It's only less than 3% of the interactions in the entire country of police. Use of force only occurs in less than 3% of the total, the millions upon millions of interactions that police occur every day. But you would ask the public, hey, what do you have? What's the percentage of use of force on somebody? They'll say, oh, probably, I don't know, half the time, 30% of the time. And that's not correct. And if you look at the 3%, 90, about 90% of use of force complaints are unfounded. And we know now, because of body cameras, that that is how we know that they're unfounded. So it's the most recent studies are done with the use of body cameras, and 90% of the complaints are rejected because what is the person doing? They're making a false allegation against the police.
Well, the body cams have become cops' best friends, no doubt about it.
Absolutely.
There used to be,
Absolutely.
the ACLU and those who are, not necessarily pro law enforcement or pro cop used to think that, this is going to be our way of proving how dirty they are and how much they lie and so on and so forth. And the cops are going to hate being on camera all the time. The cops are like, are you kidding me? Because exactly what you just said, they're going to have false allegations lodged against them, and now they have evidence and proof that they're not doing it. And what you just said too is very, very important. 3% use of force. That's use of force counting justified and excessive. And
Yeah.
and the and the amount in that 3% that is excessive is probably less than 10% of those even that would be considered excessive. And so,
And
the
even less of those are shootings.
right.
So I mean, and that's what everybody gets focused on is shooting. So if you ask the public how many people a year are shot by cops, you hear numbers on people in the street saying five, 10,000,
Yeah,
when it's literally a couple of hundred a year.
right.
It might get up to around
You said
800 or so.
millions
It
out of millions
depends.
and billions of interactions that you pointed out. Um,
Yeah,
so we've referred a couple of times to your study, Proposition 47. For people who are unaware, what is
yeah.
Proposition 47? Tell us about that and why you studied it.
Well, Proposition 47 is a California has propositions. If they really don't use the legislature to enact as much as the public, so they have propositions all the time. This proposition was called the School Safety, the Community and School Safety Act. It didn't have anything to do with community, and it didn't have anything to do with school safety. But needless to say, that's what it was called, and the public passed it with about 58% of the vote. And ultimately, what it did was about depopulating prisons. That was the main reason while it went into effect, because Gavin Newsom saw that prisons were too expensive, and he wanted to use the money to do other pet projects. And so you wanted to release prisons. So his idea was, let's have Prop 47, and we're going to reduce our prisons, and we're going to take less people into the prison system because we're going to change crime. So it used to be, uh, prior to 2014, if you stole something of value above $450, that was a felony. Like in most states, there's a value of theft that may go over to about $500, sometimes a little bit higher. But they raised it to $950 before it became any arrestable offense. So you could steal up to $950 worth of value. And it's not in a day, it's not in a 6 hour period, it's not in an hour period. You could literally go from a business to business to business and steal $950 worth of value on anything. Or I could steal from you. I could break into your home and steal your handgun, because those aren't going to be of value generally over 950 unless there's some sort of specially made caliber or something like that. and
Mhm.
it's never going to rise to an arrestable offense. So if you see this, all this is related back to the crime stats. So if less people are getting arrested for crime in California, yet the crime is still occurring because people are stealing more, they're just not getting arrested, that would affect the crime stats. It would show that there's less people getting arrested for theft, but it's actually increased
And
exponentially because people are allowed to commit these crimes. And the other insanity of Proposition 47 is that there was no bundling that equal to a felony. So I could steal, that goes back to, I could steal 10 times a day of the 950
just different
and it never
locations.
equal to a felony. Here's the other problem. At some point, the cops are no longer going to care. The businesses no longer care. And they're not going to call police because when they call police, the police say there's nothing I can do. So as a result, all of a sudden you see things being stole of a value more than $950. So what has occurred? What has occurred is you have businesses leaving communities in droves because they can't afford the bottom line increases of running a business. Because you could hire security guards. So security guards are helping inept. I've got video in my report that shows security just standing there while people go in and ransack a place. They don't
Is
really
it
have
on
any
your is it
legal.
on your is it on your Substack report on this?
I don't have it on that, but I've had it
Okay.
on others, and I have. But I the what I do like in all humility about the report is it's not only qualitative or quantitative, but it's qualitative. And I have embedded videos that have included interviews with police officers on the street, and they are telling the problem, and that's actually
Um,
embedded in my Substack.
okay. What about the ones where they're robbing right in front of the police and they stand there and watch them? Is there any way we could find that? Because Dylan's over there hunting right now and he could pull it up so we could see it. Is there anywhere to find that publicly at the moment?
I can find them. I've got them on files, but if you just
No, it's
Google.
okay. Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh,
Yeah. I mean,
oh,
it's all over the place, especially if it's in California. It's
okay.
all over the place.
What should he search for to pull that up? The
I
videos
would
that
look
you
for retail theft, California, security um, standing, something like
I've
that.
probably seen some of the ones you're talking about, but I'm just curious to see which ones you used in your report there. And while he looks for that, I want people to understand it's not just because all we've talked about so far is shoplifting, stealing,
Yeah.
from businesses, or as you
Right.
say it, from a private home, stealing somebody's gun, or whatever the case might be. But as
Yeah.
you point out in your report, this is much more than just shoplifting, which a lot of people feel like is a somewhat victimless crime. They're wrong, but that's how they see it, right?
Yeah.
Proposition 47 reclassified six nonviolent crimes from felonies to misdemeanors, including possession of nearly all types of illegal drugs. We're not just talking about a dime bag of weed. We're talking
No.
about fentanyl, heroin, cocaine, date rape drugs. Also on the list, as you've written here, is check forgery, bad checks, stolen property, shoplifting, grand theft, and so forth. Then you get into the $250, or I'm sorry, $950 story. But the bottom line here is they have taken serious crimes and made them non-serious crimes, felonies to misdemeanors, and a lot of them are very, very dangerous and can lead to violence because
Oh, it
most drug purchases are not, you know, even transactions. A lot of times, drugs are acquired by stealing them, robbing, and so on and so forth from the dealers who are bringing them, and the mules and so forth. So my point being, Proposition 47 is creating a lot of victims beyond just the victims of, retail theft.
Oh, absolutely. I spent 10 of my years in pretty deep undercover. And part of those years, again, 5 of those were DEA. Even as an undercover agent, I worked murder for hires, where you would have informants that say, "Hey, this person wants to kill somebody," and you end up doing these investigations. It's not always a pleasant interaction when you're doing drug deals at a high level. It's business, but it's very serious business. And if you make mistakes, you can get killed. And that's me as a law enforcement officer. Just imagine what it's like if you're just a person trying to go buy drugs from somebody else, and the ability to get ripped off, the ability to get killed, to get robbed on other things. There's all kinds of stuff that could occur. But in California, my research showed where violent crime had increased. This is again from the time period of 2014 to 2023, both supported by Gavin Newsom because he was the lieutenant governor at the time, and Kamala Harris. She was the AG. This is important because this is a snapshot to see what we're going to see as a president. They decided to support it. Violent crime increased statistically that we know of reported crime 23% during that time period. But the violent crime arrests, this is very important, dropped 9%. So you had an increase in 23% while you had arrests and for violent crime go down 9%. In property crime, arrests went down 38%. And again, that's reported, Bob. It's not unreported or just people giving up. That's reported. And drug crime was a staggering 86%.
It
86%
is.
are no longer being arrested. So I could have 3 ounces of fentanyl, the most dangerous drug known to man at this time, and three ounces would kill uh, potentially 20,000 people
I was going to say a few thousand people. I wasn't going to say 20,
uh,
but yeah, I get it because all it
because
takes is, I mean, the slightest
it's a
little amount.
dropper full. Yeah, if the
There
it's
you
a
go.
dropper full on a pill is if you have more than that, you could OD.
That's right, and it's not even an OD at that point, it's a poisoning, I mean, because
Exactly. Yeah.
sometimes people even handling it end up, ODing, if you will, or, being
Yeah.
killed or nearly killed from it, so,
Well,
yeah,
that's
so
the other thing about synthetic drugs that people have to understand is it has in every route of administration. So it's not just like crack cocaine; you have to smoke it. But fentanyl, heroin, those kinds of drugs, LSD in particular, but fentanyl and LSD, they can aerosolize in the air and you can die from it.
that's
You could get it on your hands and you could die from it. And so it has any route of administration, and LSD and heroin in particular, anything that's kind of grown in those synthetic labs can be extremely dangerous to humans, even if you don't consume or ingest the drug as a drug user.
let's, Dr. Myers, let's pivot over to violent crime now because we're talking about drug crime. And again, that
Yeah.
can lead to violence, as I was pointing out in drug transactions. What I was trying to say can lead to a lot of violence and a lot of people getting killed. But let's talk about actual murders and assaults and rape, sex crimes, and so on and so forth. What do the FBI statistics show there, and what is the reality of that? And I'll kind of set the table with here in Cleveland. The mayor about 2 weeks ago here held a press conference and was bragging about the fact that homicides in the city of Cleveland are lower this year than they were last year. Now, for about 3 years in a row in Cleveland, Ohio, um, new record was set each year of as far as the number of homicides. It was beating the one from the year before. But this year, homicides are down. And there was a press conference bragging about that. And it didn't seem right to me because I know what the police situation here is here, and I know what the how understaffed they are and so forth. And so I checked in with somebody who's got access in the police department, a detective who's got access to the statistics, and I said, homicides are down. Are things getting better? And he said, hell no. He said, homicides are down, but guess what? Shootings are up 20%. So how do you account for that? Well, bad shots, good medical care, what emergency response may be saving some lives, but statistics don't always tell the story. The lower number of homicides does not necessarily mean a lower number of crimes or attempted homicides when you look at a statistic like that.
Well, when you have homicides, or if you have a reduction in homicides, there's very different reasons for why you may have a reduction in homicides. The first thing is maybe they just have been lucky in not killing people when they've had an increase in shooting. So in that case, you've indicated that the officer, the detective, showing they've actually have an increase in shootings. I guess they're being rewarded for not killing anybody. but that's not necessarily a good data point, to have. The other is there's pressure on law enforcement to try to be proactive with certain things. And so you could go out and do some hotspot policing and take care of it, but it's going to pop back up if you don't have good criminal justice public policy. The whole this occurs. So when you talk about why violent crime occurs is because of recidivism. We're not paying attention to recidivism. Recidivism for violent crime is generally 63%. After about 3 years, it rises to about 67% after 5 years. So we know those people will reoffend at a very high level, and we're letting people out of prison early. In California, for instance, they let about 15, 20,000 people out, including violent offenders. That means they're coming back into the community and they're reoffending. And then, oh, by the way, if you have prosecutors that are doing zero bail or what's called cashless bail, then they're not being held accountable for being arrested. And then law enforcement arrests these folks. They don't have to put up any bail, and then they get back out. In the study I did in California, it shows that cashless bail ends up increasing the recidivism rate to about 75 to 80%. When cash bail, it has about a 35% recidivism rate. Now that's not after being incarcerated, but the bail is an important part of the criminal justice tool. I have no problem with cashless bail if somebody qualifies for cashless bail. But my goodness gracious, Bob, if you have had a criminal history, especially a violent criminal history, you should never qualify for cashless bail or zero bail. That's there for first time offenders and people probably of good standing that made a mistake. And it's not a felony or doesn't
Is
rise.
is anybody demanding answers from the judges who are allowing these people out on no bail? I mean, because there has to be some accountability there when maybe nobody has presented these numbers to them, the 35% recidivism for cash bail and 70% for non, because you're right. If they take you downtown and book you and then you're on your merry way again, why do you I didn't bother me very much. What do I care? Why would you not want to go back out and continue doing what you were doing? You have suffered no injury whatsoever from it. You haven't been held accountable financially. Lord only knows if they're going to bother prosecuting you at all for your crime. And if they do, is that I don't want to get too overtly political here, but is that probable, left wing Soros, sponsored judge going to actually sentence you to jail time? If you have no fear of consequences, you have no concern about your actions, essentially.
Well, that's true. A lot of these judges, it's been as a result of legislation that they've had their hands tied to. So the numbers that I got on California, we've had 56 there's 58 counties in California. 56 of the 58 of the sheriffs and DAs, regardless of political party, are against Prop 47 and fighting the governor on it. That's how significant it is because even the district attorneys have realized that the legislation has affected where they can't even go to court. And part of it is they've imposed zero bail as a statutory matter to keep people out. So in a lot of the states where that's occurred, the counties where jails have done it, where they haven't required it, you're seeing some of them start to back off. Portland, as an example, didn't have that legislative requirement, but you're seeing judges now go, hey, well, crap, maybe this wasn't that great of an idea. Maybe we should go back to not having decrim and enforcing the law, and then as a result have sentencing. So we're seeing Seattle and Portland doing this, but in areas where New York, Illinois, California, of course, they're our biggest states per population. We've seen legislation that's occurred that's make these limits. The terrible part of Prop 47 in California is they eliminated three things the judges had in order to put people in jail or prison, mental health reform, mandatory mental health services, or mandatory drug or alcohol treatment. Prop 47 did away with that. They don't give them, they don't, there's no resources because they're not going to jail. So a judge can't say, okay, you don't qualify for jail, but you qualify for mental health treatment. We're going to sentence you to that. Now, if you don't show up, you're going to go to jail. If you don't show up to drug treatment, you're going to go to jail. But they don't even have that carrot and stick philosophy now. So, what has happened with the mental health crisis? That's the homeless crisis, Bob. It's not about people not having a home to go to, it's about drug dependency and mental health. And those are the people that are living on the streets. And they choose to live on the streets. They don't want to, but they choose because they don't want to be clean. There's no incentive to be clean. They may want to in their heart. I'm not saying that they don't want to as humans, but the reality is they don't want to clean up and they're not going to be forced, they're not going to do it unless it's mandated to do it. So the
Right.
homeless crisis in America today has nothing to do about being destitute. There's maybe 5%. I'm just pulling those numbers out, but if you look at the big entirety of, there's probably 5% of people that have been lost their job and they can't afford a loaf of bread and they go out. Well, what do most of these people do? They go to organizations that will take them in. So the homeless people aren't even going to these organizations. They're choosing to live on the street, and that's the way they want it because they can have drugs at any time that they want, and that's what they want. They don't want anything else in life.
Drugs provided by taxpayers in many
Yeah.
cases in the cities. That's the crazy
And
part of
that's
this.
why
So
California, the 51% of the homeless is in that state alone.
I got a couple more things I want to cover here with you, and we'll get to migrant crime in a moment here. But the NCVS, that's the National Crime Victimization Survey, and this is just so very important to address the topic we started with, which is what do the FBI stats show and what is the reality? Since 2020, the total number of serious violent crimes, those are rapes, robberies, and aggravated assault, the categories that corresponded to the FBI's measure of violent crime, has skyrocketed. Total violent crime, according to the NCVS, was 55% higher in 2023 than when the current administration took office in 2020. Rapes are up 42%, robberies 63%, aggravated assaults by 55%. Mind you, I would be alarmed if it was 6.3%, not 63%. We're talking about some just extraordinary numbers here. That's since 2020 through 2023. And they're telling us crime is dropping and we're supposed to buy that. I mean, honestly, I doubt very many people, and I think they're counting on this fact, know that what the NCVS is. They don't know anything about the fact that there is a survey of 240,000 people every year to see exactly what crimes they have experienced versus what is actually being reported.
That's true, and even the survey's underreported because who are they calling? They're calling people that have maybe have a complaint about that somehow has gotten into the system that they've been involved in some sort of incident. Nothing happened. So the survey may be even a bit lower than what the reality is. Underreported crimes is significant. There's somewhere in the neighborhood of about 50% of the burglaries in America are not reported at all. These are all based on crime stats. If you look at people who are arrested or victim of spousal abuse, there is a vast majority of times that the police are not called when that occurs. If you have the Ferguson effect, but if you have less police officers, there's less police officers there to enforce the law. So that affects the number of people who the crimes that are committed and the number of police officers that they have. It's so important to have proactive policing, and it has such an impact that that in itself could deflate crime statistically significant.
That's exactly right. And Dr. Myers, I want to talk about something that not a lot of people want to talk about because it's a part of the illegal immigration issue. And since this is an election year, I don't really care if it wasn't an election year. The fact is, for the last 4 years, we have seen this skyrocketing number of illegal immigrants coming across the border. Crazy numbers. Well, just a few weeks back from the time this airs, actually, it's only been about a week and a half or so, but we found out that according to ICE records, there are as many as 650,000 violent criminals on our streets who were convicted or whose charges are pending of violent crimes in their own home countries. They have been sent to the United States and they have been allowed to roam free. They didn't get transferred from a jail in their particular country and brought to the United States for incarceration. They brought to the United States and set free. 420,000 convicted violent criminals, the same violent crimes that I just mentioned here, murders, sex assaults, robberies, and ag assaults. 420,000 were convicted. Another 220,000 plus whose charges were pending at the time they left their country and came here. So over 650,000. Among those, 15,000 or so rapists, 13,000 murderers. These are convicted, mind you, not just the other ones, and they're free in this country right now. Do you have any data whatsoever on migrant crime in the United States in that? I guess over the course of the last 4 years.
Well, it's hard to get specific data because it's not because of being underreported or not reported at all. But I did a report about 4 months ago on this, and my data showed that if we have about 14 million people coming into the country illegally, that is a very conservative number as far as I'm concerned. I think it's probably much higher than that. But
Agreed.
let's just say it's 14 million. If you look at a 5% rate of criminality, and again, that's a conservative estimate. That equates, back then I wrote about this, that equates to about 700,000 people that would be actively committing crime in America. Lo and behold, this week or last week, what happened? We got this report that came out that justified my um, thoughts that we have over 600,000 that are actually committing criminality. The issue becomes is the if you can't contain the border, then people are going to release inmates from where they come from. So in South America, universally across South America, a lot of the people crossing in have been released from prisons and jails and from mental health facilities. And as a result, they're coming in at a higher rate. So the percentage of criminality probably is higher than what usually is because of the vast amount of people being released from prisons and jails. The Haitian community, we saw what occurred in Haiti with the overthrow of the government. The citizens left like rats on a sinking ship, and we're getting the spillover of anybody and everybody that came in. And the problem is when you have that kind of mass immigration, illegal immigration, there's no accountability, there's no vetting, and most importantly, there's no assimilation into this country. We have to have immigration laws that allow people to assimilate into our culture and into American values. That's the reason the immigration system took a while. That's the reason it took up to 7 years, sometimes 10 years to become an American citizen. That's the reason immigration is a spigot that's used. You can turn it up or turn it down based on the needs of the country. And that could be, hey, we need more PhDs that can help work on rockets. We need maybe labor resources, but it's all a spigot that's controlled up and down. It was never intended to be mass where everybody just comes in and there's no value. So, what are we seeing? We're seeing much more cultural crime that's occurring based on what the crime was in their home countries. And I'll give you an example. We're seeing much more scooter theft and scooter crime. So people are coming up on scooters, two-man scooters, and they're robbing people, mugging people. That's all a typical crime that occurs where? In South America. And we're seeing that type of crime deployed into the United States, which before we wouldn't see that particular type of criminality. So that gives you an example. In New York City, we have multiple different ethnic groups coming from different places in the world. And a lot of times they're going to bring in the type of culture crime that they committed in their home country.
Probably I don't want to say the best example of that, but the most notorious example of that in recent weeks is the story of the Haitians in Springfield, Ohio. and the reports of, everybody says allegation. It's not allegations, it's reporting by the citizens of that city, that town,
Yeah.
in which 20,000 Haitians have been dropped on a small town of 60,000 people, unassimilated, as you pointed out, not speaking English, not being required to learn how to speak English, to be given driver's licenses, to be able to drive cars badly, causing all kinds of damage and accidents, but also bringing with them a culture in which some things that the citizens there have been reporting are happening is commonplace where they're from. And the idea of wildlife being grabbed, talking about waterfowl, geese, and ducks and things like that, grabbed and beheaded and cooked and eaten, and perhaps stray animals, which may or may not be pets. These are not uncommon things in certain other cultures. And should we be shocked when they come here and commit these kinds of actions here? And we're told that it's demonization and it's racist to point these things out, but it's not racist to say in Haiti, in some of that Haitian Creole culture, it's reality. It's these are things that happen. People who have experience down there in Haiti will tell you that.
Well, we have things called cognitive biases that occur in all of us, and there's many cognitive bias. I've kind of invented one where it's called the ugly American cognitive bias, where we assume the rest of the world has the culture and the behaviors of us. And the fact is, we have people, if they don't come in and assimilate, they're going to bring particular cultures and behaviors that may be normal to them, but we're going to be um, terrified or don't understand. And Haiti is a perfect example, one of the poorest countries in the world, where you got to find food and you got to eat it. Plus, they also practice witchcraft and the occult. And there's many times where they take animals and use their hearts or internal organs to do their ceremonies. Again, most Americans, if I said this, they would be aghast that I've even said such a thing, but it's true
You're not making
because
it up.
I'm not making it up. It is what it is, and we know for sure that some of the religious practices there are done as a result of voodoo, and they will continue those religious practices. So the ugly American uh, bias that occurs happens all the time when we're personally offended by what we see, and we should be, but it's an accepted practice. And the reason is we haven't, immigration needs to be based on assimilation. And then you won't see those kind of practices, because if you're from a country and you see a bunch of ducks on the pond, you don't know that it, it's it's open season. They don't know laws. They don't know what the hunting laws are. Do you know what the hunting laws are? You're going to go out and hunt. You don't care what the hunting laws are. I don't care when duck season is. I don't care when deer season is. I see a stray cat and I've tasted cat and it tastes good. I'm going to eat it.
Yeah, no, you're 100% right. I've never heard of it phrased that way, the ugly American bias, but I think there's something to it. We just kind of assume that everybody else is the same. And when they do have practices that we might be considered, or we might consider barbaric and just, completely, distasteful and abhorrent, we would never do such things. They come here and do it. And guess what? We're going to report it as a crime. They're like, what's wrong with you guys? You don't do this too? And that's a disconnect there. But it does not lessen the number, or not the number, but it doesn't lessen the concern that people have over migrant crime, people coming to this country and
Right.
not assimilating and bringing habits and customs with them that we find particularly distasteful. Last thing before we're done here, Dr. Myers, since you're America's criminologist, I haven't asked you about the assassination attempts on Donald Trump's life and the Secret Service failures. I think we can certainly say failures unequivocally. Um, there were some successes, I suppose, because the individual at the golf course was shot at and took off, and he's been arrested. So that he didn't get his shot at Trump. But the systemic failures to protect and preserve President Trump. Secret Service is under the auspices of DHS, Department of Homeland Security, which is run by Alejandro Mayorkas, who is responsible for a lot of the things that you and I were just talking about. Can you just give me your impression of that aspect of law enforcement in the country right now? Is Secret Service um, broken beyond repair? Does it need to be completely, I don't want to say reimagined, that's what they say about ICE, but does it need to be broken down and built back up in another format?
I think it needs to return to the Secret Service of the once great agency it was. I would say that about the FBI, that it needs to return to the organization that it once was. There also needs to be limitations based on what they can do. Now, before I address that first question, this is the problem with the Department of Homeland Security that was started under President Bush. I have concerns for a Leviathan law enforcement agency that is all encompassing. And when you have that, you have the ability to have mass amounts of politicalization and abuse that can occur with a law enforcement agency that is all powerful, that can arrest, that can detain, that isn't separated out some. The founding fathers, I think, probably would have looked at the DHS as more of a national police, which was never what they intended it to be. They never intended to have a national police force. They wanted police basically to be local and state, and they wanted the federal agencies to be according to certain limitations. That's the reason you saw them only have a U.S. Marshal. You saw them have customs because they thought immigration and trade was important to regulate. Now, with respect to the United States Secret Service, we had a, and I wrote this 48 hours after the Trump assassination attempt. I like to give it a cooling off period to gather information before I opine on something. But
Mhm.
this was a command and control failure at the top. It also was a command and control failure at the location that occurred. I have been involved in Secret Service details. I have done I've protected protectees. I've worked with the Secret Service. There's many times where back in the day when I worked, there was too many people to protect, so they had to bring in state agents, like I was as a Kansas Bureau of Investigation agent, to help with protection. Um, when you have those kinds of things, there is one central command. The Secret Service is in charge. They make sure and account for all of the things that need to be done, including where you're located, radio systems, how you're going to communicate, Overwatch. So there was a command and control failure. There was a communication failure. To have two different forms of communication, one going to the local and state, the other one going strictly to the Secret Service, is only going to ask for trouble. By the time you communicate one to the other, it's going to take minutes, and you need communication that happens in real time. The other one is a failure to recognize threats and threat assessments. So they didn't use crime prevention through environmental standards to look at their threat space and determine what the threats were and have a hardening of those positions and locations that can occur. And they didn't use territorial reinforcements and artificial reinforcements to help mitigate those areas as well. Third, they didn't have enough resources to President Trump. President Trump is not just a former president who gets a limited detail. President Trump's threat assessment is high. Why? Because there are some people that want to kill him. There's politicians that are saying he is evil and he's a threat to democracy. His threat assessment is extremely high as a former president, number one. And number two, oh, he's running for president again. He deserved and should have been given the same Secret Service detail that the President of the United States gets, which not only includes the inner circle, but the perimeter support, the supplies, the sniper observer capabilities, as well as the air support, which includes drone capabilities. And all of those things were absent in the first assassination attempt. Kudos on the second to the agent that was able to see the person ahead of time and stop that event well. But again, the management of the Secret Service said, oh, at the last minute, the president decided to go golfing. That is an asinine answer because all of a sudden they had to figure out how to take care of him. President Trump was the president for 4 years. He golfs all the time. They know every course that he goes on. They could pull out the numbers and the data for those particular areas and say, implement this. And right now, we've got the information. We got all of the pictures of where things are at. We know where the threats are at. Then protect the president. It's incredible for me to hear from the management of the Secret Service it's all about excuses. So let's go back. Let's stop politicizing these organizations. and let's rebuild these once great agencies into the ones they were. But my personal opinion is the DHSS as a Leviathan organization is best served if it is the one split up into different law enforcement agencies like it was prior to 9/11. We just need to do a better job collecting data and intel and sharing it. That's what prevented 9/11. Law enforcement stopped all 19 of the suspects prior to them carrying out their details. They just were unaware that they were under the radar by the FBI.
Right. Yeah.
So
And of course,
we overreacted, in my opinion, to 9/11 was horrible, and I'm not saying it wasn't horrible, but we overreacted by starting a Leviathan huge bureaucracy that now we have to deal with.
yeah, it's a pretty staggering thing to think about the way the Secret Service, Homeland Security, and that is run now, because too many failures of command and too many, as you pointed out, and too many failures in communication led to that. And I just wonder if they were all accidental or if there wasn't something more than that. But
I
that's
used to
something we
say,
don't need to
yeah,
get
yeah. I
into.
used to say that they were unintended consequences. I can't. I say just consequences now because I don't know. I hate to say that, but I don't know. And I haven't even talked about the hiring standards and the implementation of DEI.
I've talked about that a lot over the course of the last 2 months. So, and so have a lot of other people. And maybe that's a chat that we'll have next time around. Dr. Currie Myers, don't forget, we want everybody to follow Dr. Myers online, as you can see right there on the screen at Dr. Currie Myers. Make sure you follow his Substack and read his work there as well. Dr. Myers, America's criminologist, thank you for updating us on the stats and the reality of the reported versus the statistical. It is a very, very dangerous country we're in right now, and we need to know the truth. So thanks for being here to tell it.
Always a pleasure to be on. Stay safe.
Thank you. All right, there you go. Don't forget, if you enjoyed this episode, especially if you are interested in crime in America, by all means, save and share this link. Don't forget to give us a like, give us a subscribe, give us an alert button as well. Slam that alert button whether you're watching on YouTube or on Rumble, or if you happen to be listening on Spotify, so that you can get more great content here on Strictly Speaking. Thanks for watching. We'll see you next time.